All right, we have a couple of minutes here. I'm just going to wait for everybody to kind of settle in as my video starts working and audio starts working. And just so you know, hi, Sebastian. I got my cat here. Ever since we got back from England, my cats won't leave me alone. I guess they actually missed us. Jim says, hey, you won't believe this, but I just saw someone that looks just like you a few minutes ago. That's funny. Sebastian, I am doing good. I hope you are doing well, sir. Hi, Steve. Hi, Robert. Hi, Skip. Webinar number 2 for Skip. Yes. Hey, David from Australia. What time is it there, David? Australia, aren't you almost 24 hours away from us or something? Or no, almost 12 hours, I think it is. Something like that. Hi, everybody. 10 a.m. for David. Wow, that's awesome. Jim said, did you get to hang with your friend Steve Grimmett? Is he doing better? Yes, I got to see Steve Grimmett a lot while I was over there, and he is doing better. He has a prosthetic leg now, and he's learning how to walk with it. He doesn't. I mean, it's a lot of work for him, but he's getting more comfortable with it. But yeah, everything's going good. I just wanted to let you all know real quick here. Hey, Robert. Novagoth, is that how you say it? Novagoth? George, Randy, hello. Brendan, hello. Daniel, hello. Barry. Hey, everybody. Awesome. Boy, there is just so many people here. This is so great. Hi, everybody. Letting you know, just so you know, and you're not surprised, the chat right now is off, okay? I can see you, but you can't see each other. And the reason for that simply is our webinars have gotten so big that when the chat is on, people start chatting with each other, and then the chat becomes impossible for me to follow for any questions and things like that. When we had 50 people, it was fairly easy to follow it. Now we're looking at the last webinar had 600 people. This one has 400. So unfortunately, I got to keep the chat off so I can see you, and I can see if you have any questions and things like that. And so my job then is to make sure that I offer you the best experience I can with your webinar, so I keep your attention and I give you some wonderful things to learn. So that's my job. Hey, everybody. So awesome. Hey, Donovan. Hey, Randy. Ronnie. Hello. Terry. Terry says no sound, but there should be sound. The rest of you should be hearing me now, I believe. So yeah, it's just the chat becomes a distraction, and then it's really hard to keep track of things. And then, people go, well, I asked questions, but you never answered my question. And here's the other thing is if you were on Facebook today, I'll always post a link to this webinar on the day of the webinar. And then I'll also post a link for you to ask questions. That way I've got time before the webinar to prep for the questions, and it makes it much easier than trying to read everybody's questions as they come flying through, and then I miss a bunch of them. So if you always, when I post that Q&A thing and you ask your question there, it's always easier for me to get to it that way. So as I was saying before, everybody, this is Prada. This is my cat, one of my cats. I have 3 cats. And Prada will not leave me alone ever since I got home from England. So I am not going to kick him off of me right now. He's fine. I'm glad he likes me. So this is, Mike says, is this a new PRS? This is a newer PRS. And there's actually a really incredible story behind it, which I'll tell you someday. But yeah, I've had it for a few months now. But yeah, that's what it is. And I love playing the guitar. It's a lot of fun. Randy says, does your cat like to rock? I actually think he likes the more mellow stuff that I do, but I can't really tell. He most of the time he has no interest in being around me, but ever since we got back from England, he won't leave me alone. So anyway, so there you go. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I don't want to waste any more of your time. And I've got my 8-year-old sitting upstairs going, Dad, when are you going to play with me? So I suppose I'll get going here. All right, so I'm going to start at the back side of these questions, and we're just going to go through as many as I can. Let's see. Now, Ralph from Australia. Ralph, I just spoke to you. Hello. You put, thank you for this course, Steve. I've had knuckles replaced on the first and second fingers on both hands due to arthritis and have troubles with 6th and 5th string bar chords. The first finger now points in towards the center of my palm when bent, so it will not go parallel across the frets unless I skew my hand around, which then makes it hard to finger. What alternatives do I have at playing these chords? Prior to taking the course, I was unknowingly making chord fragments, which I thought was wrong. Okay, so first of all, I sympathize with you with having issues with your hands, with arthritis and your knuckles and things like that. And I'm not going to say that I've been there. I've had to deal with other things on my own. And what I will simply say is there's nothing wrong. This is music, okay? Your job, everybody on this call, your job is not to be Eddie Van Halen. Your job is not to be B.B. King. Your job is to be you in whatever capacity you can be you, okay? So I don't have any thunderstorms. Robert says I'm breaking up. I know in the last webinar it happened here and there, but just bear with me as best you can. I still am not a big fan of this software that I'm using for the webinars, but I haven't found anything really better. But I will keep searching for something, okay? Something that works. So just bear with me as best you can. But please let me know, Robert and everybody else, if you are having issues with the video or the audio, please let me know, and I'll just stop or slow down a little bit. Okay? So let's see here. Steven says it's breaking up. Let's see here. Go to okay. Yeah, and I don't want to get into that because I don't want to waste your time. There's all kinds of webinar things out there that I certainly could look into, and I've tried all kinds of them. But believe you me, I will keep working on trying to get them better as we keep going. Okay. So my point was, the video is fine. The audio is breaking up. Okay. Hold on a second. Okay, hold on. Does this sound better? If I use this, can you hear me better? Ooh. Let me know if you can hear this better. Okay, looks like that one's better. Okay, so let me know. Now I'm going to play guitar just a little bit. Can you hear that? Or is that really low? Can you hear that guitar okay? Okay. So let's just stay with that for now, and we'll use that. Maybe that will work better for you, okay? Okay. Still breaking up. Guitar and voice are breaking up. That seems great. Still breaking up. Yeah. Mark says it's mostly on Webinar Jam's buffering, and I think it is too, but let's just do the best we can, okay, everybody? And I'll try and talk as slow as I can. So the biggest thing here is understanding that, and I know I say this all the time if you've heard me talk before, yeah, now it's probably going to be out of sync with each other, but let's just do the best we can. Your job as a guitar player is not to be anybody else. And I'm not trying to just give you some motivational speech. I'm being honest with you. If I met any of you and I put my hand up to you, I almost can guarantee you that your hand would be bigger than my hand. So I have always had to deal with the fact that I have very small hands. I have very small fingers. And so when I see people like they'll make an F chord and they'll reach around with their thumb and things like that and do stuff like that on some really difficult chords, like Tommy Emmanuel. I love Tommy Emmanuel, love his playing, but he does chords that I can't do. I just can't do them. I can't physically reach them. So I have to adjust some of the things that I learned from Tommy Emmanuel because I just physically cannot do it. And then I have to be okay with myself because this is who I am. Okay, so if you're playing chord fragments because you can't play a full bar chord, you got to find a way inside you to be okay with that, because if you can't, you can't. I remember once having a guitar student, and I've told this story before, but he was I live in North Dakota, and our college football team is the Bison, the NDSU Bison. If anybody watches college football, you'd probably know who they are. But he was so big that when he would make an A chord, he couldn't use 3 fingers. He couldn't even use 2 fingers. He had to use 1 finger because his finger was so huge that when he tried and play an A chord, all he could do was play it with 1 finger. But when he did that, he couldn't get the first string to work. And he would just stress over the fact that when he'd make this chord, he couldn't get that first string to work. And I kept trying to explain to him, it's okay. I play the A chord the normal way, and I don't get the first string to work sometimes. It becomes an internal struggle because we always want things to be perfect, and I totally get it. But again, I'm not trying to be weird here, but God created us all differently, and all we can do is do the best we can with what we have. And here's what I always tell people is when Steve I wakes up every day, he just has to be Steve I. That's it, right? When John Mayer wakes up every day, he just has to be John Mayer. We have to do the same thing. We learn from these people, and we do the best we can to emulate things that they do. But that's all we can do. So please don't stress over it so much, okay? And you just got to find a way to work through it in your head. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here. Jim, hey Jim, says, is there an easy way to recognize the difference between a 4, 5, and a 1? Like if I'm in my car and I'm trying to hear the chord progression, to be honest with you, I think it just takes time. Like I can hear those. I've learned so many songs using 1, 4, and 5 chords that I can hear, you know, like if you think about it, if you start with the 1, you're always going to get that wild thing kind of thing happening, right? But when you start with the 5 chord, you get kind of the Hey Jude thing. Another big thing here is that your 4 and your 5 chords are a whole step apart, where your 1 chord is going to sound a bit distant from the other 2. Okay? Do you guys? Okay, so Brendan says the sound was better before on the old setting. Do you want me to try the old setting again? We'll take a vote. Should I try the old setting or keep the new setting? Say old or new. Old or new. Old. Okay, let me try it. Let me see what I can do. Okay, we'll try it again here. Try the old one and see. And maybe it just needs to buffer a little bit as well. Okay, so let me know. Okay, so this is better. Okay, perfect. Okay, so anyway, that's all you can really do is when it comes to the 1, 4, 5, is spend a little time. Now my daughter is over there and she's laughing because the cat is on my, there you go. Oh, that's so much better. Oh, I'm free. I was getting so sore. I just left him there because I was getting love, so that was good. So the 1, 4, 5, the big thing is getting used to thinking that the 4 and the 5 are very close to each other. Like, you see, that sort of thing. So you hear those kind of sounds a lot. That's what I would say. But it just takes some practice. You'll get it. Okay, Jim, let's see. I'm not sure if this is the same Jim, but he says, I don't know if you've covered this yet, but when you use a capo, is there an easy way to know what key you're in? Say, I like G because I like the open chord. Well, one thing that you need to do, that's what transposition is all about. Give me a second here. There we go. Okay, so the big thing here is understanding, like if you used a G, C, and D chord, right? G, C, and D, and you put a capo on, wherever it might be. Okay, now you'd have to think that whatever note you're playing up here, because when you were on G, you were on the 3rd fret, which that note is G. Well, now all of a sudden you're on the 5th fret, so now that note is A. So the best thing to be able to do is to be able to transpose in your head, knowing what the notes are actually as you play. So like this note is A, and then when I go to this C chord here, technically I'm on D, and then this chord, that note is E. So I'd have to have some knowledge, one of two things. Either I know what notes I'm playing, so I can think, well, if I move the G shape up here, I'm technically on C. And then if I'm playing a 1, 4, 5, then I just have to think in my head C, F, and G, which is the stuff that you're learning anyway in Music Theory for Life. So you'd be able to assume then if this is C, this is F, and this is G, or you'd be able to find them. So, okay. Okay, George, hello George, says in week 3, when learning to play the major scale in different positions, what we are actually doing is the 7 modes, correct? If so, in the key of G major, if someone says they're soloing in E Aeolian, then using a little A Dorian flavor also, am I correct? Where'd you go? Am I correct in thinking they are soloing in the 6th position and moving down to the 2nd position? This is always a topic of confusion for people. There are many ways to look at this, but from a guitar player's perspective, you want to learn to see the fretboard as one entity. So if you're looking at if you're thinking about, don't even worry about the other modes at this point. If you think about G major, you're in G major. Boom. You're playing over a G major chord. That's all that's happening is a G major chord. That's it. And you go to solo over the top. Do you have to stay in this 3rd to 5th fret, this first position here, to be playing G major, or can you go into the other positions but still emphasize things that are relative to that chord, the G major chord? And the answer is, of course, you can go around the fretboard, right? So if I'm in G major, I can be here, right? Whatever it is, okay? But I can go anywhere I want. So if you think about it, then G major is everywhere. We as guitar players get used to thinking that G major is here at the 3rd fret because that note is G. Okay, take the cat out of here, please. Thank you. My cat is now, or my daughter is playing with the cat. Now shut the door, please. Thank you. And so anyway, so with this G major, you can go anywhere you want. So if you think about it, if all of a sudden the chord progression is E minor, now we add in an E minor chord, does that mean we have to go up to the 12th fret? And just like the G major, the answer is no. We could stay anywhere we want. The difference is what are we emphasizing in each position? So in summary, what I want you to understand is the ideal situation for you when it comes to scales and modes and everything like that is that you have the understanding that G major is A Dorian, is B Phrygian, is C Lydian, is D Mixolydian, is E Aeolian. They're all in the same key. They're all part of the same family. It's just you're emphasizing different chords at different times. So if somebody says, oh, this song's in the key of A Dorian, what they're saying is you're in G major but you're emphasizing the second chord, which is A minor, in the key of G major. That's the first step, is understanding that logic. The second step then is when you go to your fretboard, what are you going to do? Because if you think about it, that G major is A Dorian, is B Phrygian, is C Lydian, and so on. Okay, so is your fretboard. G major, A Dorian. I know people learn that second position. They call it Dorian, and this third position is B Phrygian. I try and avoid calling them those names. I understand the logic because you're looking at the root. That's what you're doing. I understand that. I learned how to play it that way as well. But it's so much more freeing if you stop thinking of it that way and you think, okay, well, I'm going to be here. Here comes a G major chord. So my rhythm player is playing a G major chord. Right, whatever it is I'm going to do, and then E minor comes on. Whatever it is I'm going to do, I don't have to shift positions. I can just revamp the way I'm seeing my fretboard in this position. And then, you know, whatever other chord comes up. And I just keep kind of revamping what I'm doing. And I'm actually looking at trying to create a new course that I think will take you to the next level after you understand this basic idea. But the trick is, if you think about it, let me do something very, very, very basic. So if you think about it, imagine in your head this chord progression is being played. Which is a 1-6-4-5. It's a doo-wop chord progression. 1-6-4-5. If I was going to solo over the top of that, I'd be thinking, okay, well, here comes this G chord. Here comes E minor. Here comes C. And here comes D. And then G. So what I'm doing is I'm thinking about the chords as they're moving along in my brain. I'm not trying to go, okay, G, E, C, and D. And it would just be a lot of movement doing that. So try not to think of it that way. Try and think, if all you knew how to do, and again, I don't want to spend the whole lesson on this because I know other people have questions, but this is always the biggest topic of confusion for people. You could learn just this one position. Just those notes. And you could solo in all 7 modes with just those 7 notes. Because as guitar players, we get locked into this idea of positions. Piano players don't have positions. It's just one rolling concept that moves up and down the piano. But because we're visually moving up and then creating a new shape and moving up and creating a new shape, we start thinking about things in terms of positions. But please remember, when you were learning pentatonic and you were connecting the positions of the pentatonic together, you never thought of it as that. You didn't go to like the second position because that's what the key was in or something like that. The second position of pentatonic was always just the second position, and the third position connected to the second position. When people think pentatonically, they get the bigger picture where they're all just connected and moving around the fretboard. But when they start doing diatonic, all of a sudden this shape is Dorian or this shape is Phrygian. It's not. It's just like the pentatonic. They just connect together. Okay. And again, I completely understand the confusion because I used to get confused the same way. But what I'm saying is if you just knew these notes, you could solo in G major with those notes. You could solo in A Dorian with those notes. You could solo in B Phrygian with those notes. It's just, what are you emphasizing? That's what makes all the difference in the world. That's what melody is. That's one of the most crucial things that you can study is melody. Understanding if this chord is being played, what are you going to play over the top of it? Not just the scale choice, but the notes that you're emphasizing over the top of this chord. That's how melody is created. So if a G chord is being played, yes, you can choose a scale or a position or something like that. But most importantly is what are you going to do over the top of that? Because you can't just go forever. At some point, you got to start creating a melody. Okay? So, and Donovan says chord tones and non-chord tones. That's absolutely right. But the problem is for most people, they don't think about it as chord tones and non-chord tones. Chord tones meaning they're part of the chord. The notes that you're emphasizing are part of the chord. Non-chord tones are notes that are not part of the chord, which is absolutely true. Donovan's 1,000,000% right. But the problem that most people have is that they're not thinking about it, that they're thinking about a shape. So they're just playing. And everything's just playing. It's just playing, which is what I call meandering, which is a great technique. But if you're going to start creating melody, you've got to figure out how to create. You know, however you're going to do it. Greg says, sorry, my contacts are drying out. Greg says, can you do an example for the ear switching notes emphasis same position? Sure. So let's say I'm going to play G. I'll do that G minor CD. So I've got. And then here comes E minor. I could stay there, but I'll give you something else. Here comes C. Here comes D. There's my G. Okay. So that's kind of the thing. Yeah. Greg says, thanks for the answer. I'll keep it simple. That's totally the truth. If you study great players like Neil Schon from Journey, he's got amazing technique, or Steve Lukather from Toto, or, I mean, there's just a million, Richie Kotzen. There's all kinds of wonderful players out there. John Mayer, again, love him or hate him. He's a good player, in my opinion. Some of them have a lot more technique or a lot more flair or a lot more flash, but they still have the availability of being able to create a killer melody when needed. And when I was, again, I don't want to go through a big, discussion about my past, but when I was a kid, I was able to replicate songs very, very well. I had a lot of technique, and I could concentrate, and I could visualize, and I could memorize, and all these different things. But I had a really horrible sense of melody because I never stopped to think about what a song really is. You know, I never stopped to think about this chord and how my responsibility as a guitar player is to accent, to glorify this chord. And then this chord comes up and I do the same thing. Now, that doesn't always happen. Every situation is different. If I'm playing a Slayer song, I always use Slayer as an example because it's a prime example. I'm not trying to accentuate various chords because the chord progression is, whatever it is. Actually, no Slayer songs, but anyway, so I don't need to play a Slayer tune. But my point is that the song doesn't really need it. But if I've got a song that's based off real chords that I've got going, some sort of thing like that, and I'm going to solo over the top, I've got to respond to those chords to a certain degree. Listen to George Lynch from Docket. I mean, listen to anybody, and you're going to hear that in their playing. That's what a mode really is. And for us, again, to end this conversation and go on to the next thing, I'm sure there's more questions about this, but the trick is you can emphasize G major here. You can emphasize an E minor chord here. You can emphasize a B minor chord here. You don't have to go other places. You can go wherever you want. Donovan says Vito Bratta. Vito Bratta is an incredibly wonderful, well, I don't know if he is anymore because he kind of dropped the face of the planet, but he was one of my absolute favorites. And the reason I loved Vito Bratta, if you guys know who Vito Bratta is from White Lion, he was able to tap. Like, he did a lot of tapping, but he didn't do it in the Eddie Van Halen style. He did it in a very melodic way. One of my favorite players. Thank you, Donovan. Absolutely beautiful guitar player. you know, you think about all these major key songs, and he just made these amazing solos. It's so true. So again, to wrap up, the first thing is understanding the logic of what you're trying to solo over. What key are you in? What chords are you using? Then you set a platform on your fretboard. You set a roadmap of the key, and then you decide how you want to move around, right? Because all you really have on the fretboard are chords and scales, right? And chords are really just arpeggios. That's what they are. They're arpeggios. So your whole fretboard is just covered with these movements around, but the movements are in the key. So the trick is to have some of those notes kind of shine so you can see them more as you're playing. So if a G chord is being played, you've got this fretboard, this roadmap sitting here, but these notes are shiny. These are the ones you want to emphasize. And then E minor comes up. It's the same roadmap, but these notes are shiny. And you want to go, you know, you want to try and emphasize those. So it's just lots of really wonderful things that you can do. Hopefully that helps you, and hopefully I didn't waste too much of your time. John says, what do you think of Todd Rundgren as a guitar player? I loved Todd Rundgren in the early days. I haven't heard him much lately, but as an influence in my early days, Todd Rundgren was a huge influence for me. Chris says Herman Lee is my favorite. Herman Lee is an amazing guitar player too. Again, they all serve different purposes, right? And it depends on the kind of music that you're playing over. Here, I'll just tell you this quick story because it'll take 2 minutes. I grew up being a metalhead, and I played a lot of 80s metal, like you can't tell, and 80s rock and all that sort of thing. And I got a chance to play with a local North Dakota guy, which some of you may have heard of before. His name is Mitch Malloy. Now, Mitch Malloy I think he was on Epic Records or something like that, and he had a hit song, Anything at All it was called, and it was really big. It was a wonderful song, and he became really popular and was touring and doing all kinds of things like that, and he ultimately just about became the singer for Van Halen before they brought Gary Cherone in, and that whole thing blew up. But anyway, so he was coming back to do a show in North Dakota in his hometown in front of, like, I don't even know, less than 10,000 people. But he needed a guitar player. So he calls me because he had heard of me, and he said, hey, would you be willing to play guitar for this show? I was in my late teens, early 20s. So I said, sure, that'd be awesome. Now, in my head, I was a metal guy. So I'm playing all the patterns and speed stuff and blah, 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 like you probably see me play all the time. Had no knowledge of melody, like I'm telling you right now. All of his songs were more pop rock, and some were minor and things like that, but it was more poppy. It wasn't metal at all. It wasn't hard rock at all. And when I went out and played with him, I got up on stage and I thought, well, I'll just improvise these solos. It'll be really easy. I've done this stuff before. And I got out there in front of all these people, and I absolutely sucked. I was just awful. And the reason was because my approach to playing was completely wrong for the style of music that he played. I wasn't knowledgeable about melody. So guys, please don't underestimate the power of landing on the right note at the right time because you're so concerned with playing fast, or you're so concerned with massive amounts of knowledge. I think those things are wonderful. I strive for those myself. But if you don't have a sense of melody, you got nothing. Unless you're playing, you know, again, death metal all the time that doesn't really require a melody, then that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But if you're like me and you play with different bands and you play with different situations and people hire you to play on this album or do this or something like that, you got to play for the circumstance. You know, I can't just go, well, this is all I know how to do, so that's what I'll do every time. No, I got to make it work. If it's bluesy, I don't have to be B.B. King. I can be my own kind of blues, but I still got to sell blues to some degree. If it's a pop song, I still got to try and sell in pop, you know, in that format somehow. And by pop, I mean like, you know, again, like Toto or Journey or something like that. You know, there's got to be melody. So if you walk away from this remembering nothing else, please remember that with your knowledge that you're getting from this music theory stuff, to really learn how to accentuate beautiful melody. You know, think about those chords and think about how you can approach things. And then if you want to add your flash and style, that's great. But if all you're... After a while, and again, I'm not making fun of it. I do it all the time. But there's got to be more. There's got to be more. It's got to be something else on top of that. Okay? So, perfect. All right, let's take a look here. Charles, what's the best way to get my fingers to stretch so I can reach the frets? The exercises where we practice playing the scales doesn't seem to help much. The only thing I did to, and again, I have incredibly small fingers that match my incredibly small body. Okay? It was just a lot of practice. Okay? You can see right there that I've got my essential stretch here, which took a long time to get these comfortable. But you can see how far they stretch to accommodate this shape. And it just came with time. Now, you got to be careful with your wrist so you don't abuse your wrist. And here's the other really big thing is when you're playing, like when I play standing up, if I'm playing in a band or something like that, I cannot have my guitar slung really low because there's no way I'm going to be able to reach these things. So what I have a tendency to do is when I play standing up, it's lower than this. So if I get into a situation where the stretch is a little bit harder, I'll tend to bend over a little bit like this so I can reach it a little more. And then once I've got it going, then I can go. You know, you'll see guys like Zach Wild who will throw it up like this, and then he'll play like this. And he's not just doing that to look cool. He's doing it because it's how he can reach it when he's playing certain things. He's not just doing it because it's a cool move. It is a cool move, but he's doing it because it makes it easier for him to grab it. So, you know, getting, especially this, you know, 3 to 7 fret, you know, this whole step spread fingering thing, that's, you know, you can get bigger than that, but that's what you really need to be able to play a lot of these things. You don't have to play a spread fingering. You can play the smaller ones and make it a little bit easier. But if you can get that one stretched out a little bit, it just takes some time. You know, I do a lot of these things where I would stretch out. I'd sit in school and I still do it all the time. If you're ever with me, I'm always doing this kind of crap. It drives my wife crazy. But I'm always stretching out, always stretching all these things, always stretching in between my fingers, all that kind of stuff. David said, I notice I get a really sore wrist playing bar chords, and I've never played chords until taking this course. Yeah, and you will. Yeah, it just, they all require strength building. And the amazing thing about guitar playing is if you think about all of the muscles and the tendons and everything that you've got in your fingers and your hand and your wrist and your forearm, it's pretty incredible when you think about it. The amount of muscle that you use, the tendons that you use to be able to make all of these different things. You've got to train your fingers to do all that kind of stuff. And they're going to get sore. You know, but always remember to do a lot of appropriate bending. You know, I shouldn't say bending, but stretching, you know, to stretch things out, you know, like, you know, a lot of this kind of stuff to stretch out all these muscles. And don't do it to make yourself hurt. Just do a lot of stretching, you know, a lot of turning and, you know, twisting and things like that to get your hands stretched out is really, really important. Okay. Brendan said Bill shared a really good video on that in the Facebook group. Yes, there's some wonderful videos out there about that. You guys know that, but I had carpal tunnel surgery on both my hands. You can kind of see the scar here on both my hands there, and it took a long time to kind of get them back after I had that surgery. And my therapist showed me just a lot of really wonderful stretches to do where it doesn't require any machines or anything. I can just use the wall or you know, be sitting on the floor or things like that. You know, when I'm driving, a really nice one to do is I'll put my hand behind the passenger seat and kind of pull like this, and it just feels really, really great. So those are things to think about a little bit. Let me keep going here. I got to get to these questions here a little bit before we get done. Chris said, can you go over the different positions of the diatonic scales? I think I just kind of did that. Hopefully that helps you a little bit. I'm telling you, we probably could have a 4-hour conversation on scales alone, but I want you to always think of the scale positions as puzzle pieces that connect together to make one big fretboard roadmap. That's what they do. Once they're connected and they're laying on your fretboard, you then decide how you want to move through them and what you choose to emphasize relative to what's happening in the rhythm. Try not to think of this position as Dorian and this position as whatever. Connect them all together in whatever key you want to be in. If you want to be in the key of A major, right? You just shift the whole thing up because the puzzle pieces always connect together the same way. It just shifts down or shifts up across the fretboard. Okay. And once you've shifted it to where it needs to be, then you decide how you want to move around and what it is that you want to emphasize within that structure. Okay. Chris says the major seventh is as compared to the major seventh note. The major seventh chord as compared to the major seventh note seems insanely confusing to me. Well, if I played like an A major 7, the note I'm adding is G sharp, right? Because that's the major 7. So the note that I'm adding into this A major chord is the G sharp. So I'm just playing the notes of an A major chord, but I need to add in the note G sharp, which is right here. So however I need to make it, there's no right or wrong way to make a major 7th chord, but I need to add in the note G sharp. So that's the note. To make that work. But it's just, all you're doing is taking a major chord and you're adding in that major 7th pitch into the major chord. Okay. Let's see. Mark, talent versus practice. Granted, it takes a degree of natural talent to become an all-time great on guitar, but for yourself, did you just pick it up one day and just be ridiculously talented at it? No, not even close. Not even close. When I first started playing, I've always had a good ability to concentrate, which I think is really important, and memorize. I could do those two things, and I think you really need to work on those skills as a guitar player. But getting my fingers to understand each other was a nightmare. And I know I tell this story all the time, but when I got to bar chords, I almost quit playing guitar because I could not get them. I worked on bar chords for months. I'm not even exaggerating at all. And I could not get them to work. I couldn't push them down. I couldn't get the right sounds. My hands always hurt all the time. And then I swear to God, one day I just grabbed the guitar and it worked. And then I remember taking lessons from this guy for a short amount of time. And he told me that's the way it is. He described it like this. He said, learning how to play guitar isn't like climbing a mountain where every day you get a little better. He goes, you'll sit at a plateau on this mountain and never get anywhere. And then all of a sudden you'll be here. And that's the way guitar playing has kind of always went for me was, now I've learned over time that if I spend a lot more time on a certain thing and I'm patient and I'm diligent, I'm going to get there. But it requires an astronomical amount of time. Okay. Now, again, it depends on what your goals are. For me, learning how to speed pick and learning how to do all that kind of stuff, I spent hours and hours and hours. I would play, 8 hours, 10 hours a day. Even when I was going to college, I slept very little. But I would practice just all the time. And I'd sit with a metronome for 5 hours, just playing these things over and over and over to develop these things. Now, again, not everybody's looking for that technique. I'm just saying that none of that came naturally for me. It was something that I really had to work at. And then it wasn't until I started playing with other musicians and playing in bands that I really started learning what groove and music relationships and all those things were, which is why I always encourage everybody, you got to play with other musicians. Because playing along with songs, don't get me wrong, it's awesome. But there's something that you learn. There's something authentic about playing with other musicians and learning to hear and respond. And if there's a mistake, you learn how to move with it. And then I started traveling and touring, and then I learned what it was like to be on the road, and I learned what it was like to play night after night, and just all of these wonderful things that go along with this whole ride, which is just, they're all experiences, right? Before we kick off, the goal is to just have as many experiences with these things as we can, not just how fast can we pick or how many scales do we know. It's easy to get caught in that trap. So you got to keep going. Let's see. Scott says, when we are soloing in a particular key, do we use when we are blowing in a particular key, do we use the notes from the 5 positions on the neck, mixing and matching, so to speak? Yeah, you know, always think of the notes of your fretboard, of the scale that you're using, as simply a transitionary ability to move from point A to point B. That's what it is. The goal is to have a point B. That's what we've been talking about the whole time here, really, is having a point B. Because if all you're doing is just moving, you're meandering, which is a technique that I teach all the time to learn how to play the fretboard. But there are lots of guitar players that never get past meandering because they never start thinking about what makes music really music, right? That's the trick. If I'm playing in a metal band, I'm less about melody and more about technique, but I'm also about the sounds that I'm creating, right? I mean, if I can create a cool solo by playing a fast lick or playing an exotic bend or something like that, that's more pertinent to the style of music that it is. Or if I'm playing blues, I'm not saying I won't play some fast licks and things like that. Of course I will, because it's my nature. But I also have to be trying to throw some more bluesy elements into that situation. And again, if the song is more melody, then I got to be thinking about that a little bit more. So every situation is different. And that's one of the big things I love to teach people, is that as your experiences keep changing, you know, yes, you want to be you, but you dress differently when you go to this nice restaurant, and you dress differently when it's hot outside or when it's cold outside. You still change things relative to what's comfortable, what's logical. And when you're soloing, you still want to have some of that. It's always going to be you, but you still want to be able to fit into the situation. You know, there's nothing worse than having somebody play over the top of something. You know, if somebody's trying out for a band, or you hear a band, or I used to get this in jazz band all the time. Jazz band teachers locally would send their guitar students to me because every time they'd go to solo improvise over the top of something, they'd use minor pentatonic. Well, for jazz, minor pentatonic is one of the last things that you'd be using, but that's all they knew. So they would just play blues solos over the top of all these jazz tunes, and their jazz teachers would just get pissed. So you can't just go, well, it's rock and roll and it's my life. And yeah, you can do that, but you're not going to get many gigs doing that. You still got to be able to fit in somehow to the situation that you're putting yourself in. If you're going to be in a metal band, you got to do something that fits the context of a metal band. Or don't be in a metal band. That's cool too. Or if you're going to be in a blues band, you still got to do something that's within context of a blues band, or chances are you're not going to get a lot of phone calls to be in a blues band. So just something to think about a little bit. Let's see here. Finish extended chords. Can you explain how you get the B flat note in the C13 chord? I'm still trying to figure that out. That's Enrique from Naples, Florida. Can you explain how you get the B flat? Because a C13, if you think about it, Enrique, a C13 is a dominant 7 chord. It would have to say C major 13 to be a B. Anytime that little diamond or the big M is missing, it's a dominant chord. It doesn't matter if it's a 13 or a 11th or a 9th or anything. If the chord says D7 or D9 or D11 or D13 or whatever it might be, it's a dominant 7 chord, which means that the 7th is, again, a whole step away from the root. So in a D dominant 7 situation, if it's D7 or D9 or D11 or D13, I'm adding the C in. In our case, if we're using a C chord and it's C7 or C9 or C11 or C13 or anything like that, I'm going to be adding a B flat because it's a dominant 7 chord. If we want a B that's native to that scale, the C major scale, if we want the B, we have to call it a C major 7 or C major 9 or C major 11 or C major 13. We got to add that major. And that major isn't referring to the chord. That major is referring to the 7th. And it's always important to remember that. So if you see something that says C major 7, it's not saying it's a C major chord with a 7th. It's saying it's a C chord with a major 7. That's what that means. Okay. David says, I would say Metallica are a pretty good example of a metal band that uses melody. What are my thoughts? Yeah, I mean, if you look at something, a prime example, David, that I always use is Fade to Black. Fade to Black is a prime example of using melody perfectly. You know, where some songs don't need as much melody. If you listen to the solo for Enter Sandman, it doesn't need as much melody because it's playing over that. So it's not chordal per se, it's riff, right? But if they play now, all of a sudden it becomes more chordal. Their song is more chordal, and it's going to have more. Kirk Hammett is going to play more melodically over the top. So if you're playing, or like at the end of the song, when he's going, you know, the chords are going. It's just a metal chord progression. It's the 4, 5, 6 chord progression. But he's playing over those. So every time something changes, he's responding to those. And you hear that really well in the very beginning of that song. When he's doing the... He's totally following the melody as he's doing that. So, yeah, different situations even with a band like Metallica, for sure. Let's see here. Barry says, I'm taking the beginner course and theory at the same time, so I'm only on week 4 of theory. Should I focus on them one at a time or continue taking them together? Barry, it depends. I mean, if you're taking the beginning course, if you're taking the absolute beginning course, Barry, I would probably focus on that first to try and get a good visual perspective of chords and chord progressions and things like that. But I mean, it depends. Everybody works differently, Barry. Who knows? You might be able to put that together really well. But it depends on how beginner you are, Barry. You know what I mean? For me, I would have had a really tough time with theory when I was a beginner player because I just didn't understand anything about anything. And it wasn't until, you know, I started learning about like triads and like the chords that I was playing actually had, you know, an A major chord was actually made of something. It wasn't just a shape. It actually had understanding. What makes guitar difficult is because you have 6 strings. It's like 6 different pianos that are kind of set crossways from each other. So it's like you're playing on a piano, but then you're jumping up to this piano and then you're jumping over to this piano. So it gets kind of confusing, you know, when you look at certain chords and stuff, at least for me. But who knows, Barry? You might be making that work really well for yourself. Let's see. Steve, you have talked about a double sharp. You have talked about a double sharp a few times. Could you please explain this? I have to work Monday night. Well, a double sharp is just when you sharpen a note twice. So you might be in the key of G, for instance, and your note is F sharp. And again, it's just, it would happen because you're transitioning to a different key or there's some sort of accidental element happening afterwards. Because if you think about it, if you have a double sharp, it's just something else, right? Just like F sharp is the same as G flat, everything is something else, right? That's the whole thing with all this. So the terminology gets weird. But if you have an F double sharp, it's really G, just like F sharp is really G flat. F double sharp would be really G. But why would you call it that? Well, usually, again, it's happening because something unusual is happening within the composition. You don't see it a lot in regular music, but you might be changing keys, or there's some sort of, unusual chord that's coming up next that doesn't fit into the key that you're in. Therefore, it's setting it up and it's calling it. You're already on F sharp because you're in the key of G, but now there's a sharp to raise that, and thus you wind up with a double sharp. Again, I haven't seen things like double sharp since I was in college studying, Rachmaninoff and things like that. And Robert says, will you make this video available again? Yes, just as soon as we're done here, I will post it in the Facebook group so you can watch it as much as you want. So I'll post it up there and you'll be good to go. Okay. Let's see. All right. Oh, that one I answered last time. Michael says, theory versus learning songs. While I keep studying theory, I find inspiration and creativity comes from changing known songs or the actual process of learning a song. Yeah. Anytime, guys, if you're having problems with the audio and that, again, I apologize. Sometimes this technology isn't perfect, but we're getting closer. And I'll keep searching for a better kind of software out there. But the big thing is when you're studying something like music theory is very rigid and it's very absolute, right? It's the rules. It's the language that we use to speak to each other. And you can use theory to help you out creatively, and you can use theory for understanding how to approach a situation and things like that. But creativity still comes from studying other people. You know, you always have to remember that, like for me, and I'm just being honest with you, music theory is always the secondary element that I use when I'm playing. My primary element is still my ears and my eyes when I'm approaching a situation. Because I played so many songs and I've been in so many situations with music in the real world, I know how to approach things because I've done it a million times. It's when I don't really know how to approach something that I utilize theory. Okay. But theory and the real world, visualization and all those things have become kind of one and the same for me because, again, when I'm playing, if I'm playing with you and you're playing a chord progression, I'm already thinking about what you're going to do next, what the next chord's going to be, and what I'm going to have to do with that situation because I improvise a lot. It's not just, you know, going home and figuring out what I'm going to do, which I do, but I've been in many situations where, oh crap, here comes this chord and that doesn't make any sense. So what is it I'm going to do over this situation? That's where I pull my theory in. So please understand that while you're working on theory, you should always be working on learning songs and jamming and riffs and writing or whatever it is that you want to be doing, because at the end of the day, music theory is a tool, just like technique is a tool, just like licks are tools, and you know, groove is a tool. It's a way of us speaking to each other to understand what we're saying to each other, where the less theory somebody has, the less they're able to communicate what they're trying to think or what they want you to do. They've got to talk more around the edges about something like that. And the other part is that sometimes with theory, it helps us in understanding, again, how we want to approach a particular situation. But it's not the be all end all. And I know I've got theory snob friends that are all, and it's like, it still doesn't come down to that. It still has to be us trying to figure out how to approach a situation. If I'm playing over Cat Scratch Fever, which has come up like 3 times in the last 2 webinars that I've done today. Ted Nugent didn't write that because of some theory thing. He wrote it because it sounded really cool. And when you go to solo over the top of it, you got to be thinking, this is a rock and roll, and what am I going to do over that, right? But if you're soloing over Rosanna by Toto, that's a completely different ball game. So you just got to stay on your toes with this stuff. So Growler says, hey, Steve, whatever happened to the equipment course you were talking about putting together? How to set up pedals, solid state versus tube. The first one I've got to do before I go into that course is right now I'm working on putting together home recording, a basics of home recording course. Because I've had so many people asking about recording and how to do it and what they need and all that sort of thing. And I've been working on it over the spring, and I'm going to start recording that real soon. So the first thing I'm going to do is a course on home recording first, and getting you to understand the fundamentals of what goes into home recording, so you're not going out and blowing a ton of money and just wasting your time. I've seen people that go out and they go, okay, I'm going to do home recording, so I'm going to spend $10,000 buying all this stuff, and then they have no idea how to put it together and make it work. And let's not do that. Let's start with real things. You've got a computer at home. Let's start with that. And let's just try and build off of that and make something, that's functional, and then start working from there. So that's the first thing. Then I will go into making a course that talks a bit more about choruses and delays and effects loops and all those kinds. I haven't started really planning that just yet because I'm working on the home recording one first. But I will get there, because you're right. That stuff is very important. Guys, I got to head off and head upstairs and have supper and hang out with my family. So I will post this, though, in the Music Theory for Life Facebook. And I promise you I will continue trying to work on a better interface that we can use for doing webinars and such. So take care. Have a wonderful day or evening, depending on where you are. Stay positive. Watch out for the negativity out there. You're doing great. Just keep going. And let's keep making you a better guitar player as best we can. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. Take care.